The next forging technique I'm going to show you is called upsetting. So we're going to upset the metal, and I don't mean that we're going to tell it horrible jokes or something. What we are going to do is we are going to compress the metal together. That's referred to as upsetting. So for this, I'm going to have a relatively short joint of metal. I'm going to have my hammers. I've got my ball peen, which is my lighter, more detail hammer, and I've got my mallet here. I have my torch out of the torch holder. This is something that's going to have to be done in a vise, so you'll have to have your torch with you over your shoulder. And then of course I have my vise itself and my striker for when I'm ready to light the torch. So I'm going to put my piece of metal in here so that just a little bit sticks out, an inch or so. As always, when we close our vise, we hammer them closed to make sure it's really tightly closed. So we've got this little length sticking out here. Now my goal is going to be to heat just the very tip of this metal. So the top 1/8 of an inch or so. Tough to do, but I'm going to do my best. And then I'm going to take a hammer and hammer it flat. And what should happen is we should get a nice little mushroom that flattens out when we upset that metal. Sometimes people heat too much, or they heat too low down and then you have the metal bend over. I hate to admit that happens to me sometimes, so I'll do my best not to have it happen this time. Go ahead and light my torch, gas on just a little bit. Turn it so that we have our straight area and our feather at the end. Slowly put our oxygen in so we get that reducing flame. So we have inner cone and then a little bit longer middle cone. Too long, right about in there. And now I'm going to put it sideways so that inner cone just hits the very tip of that metal. I'm moving it back and forth a little bit to kind of equalize the heat. I'm going to flip it over so I'm getting it from different directions. But again, I'm just trying to get the very end of this heated up. If your piece of metal was cut from some bolt cutters like mine was, you might see that the thin part where the bolt cutters pinch together heats up first, or even maybe starts to melt. That's totally okay. I don't care about that. Now I'm going to have to move pretty quickly here. I'm going to finish heating this up, and then I'm going to turn my torch off, hang it over my shoulder, and then get my hammer immediately and start pounding. It's important that you pound straight down. If you pound off to one side or the other, it's kind of like what happens when you heat up when you pound a nail a little crooked in the wall. Okay, that looks really pretty good. And take it out of my vise. And be very careful because this is a short piece of metal. I don't want to grab the hot spot. I'm actually going to use this needle nose pliers to pick it up. And then if I hold it up against my hand, you may be able to see how the top is sort of bulged out, like the top of a nail, really. We can use this upsetting method to make thicker lines. We can also use it to create rivets, which is the next topic in this video. The next thing I'm going to show you how to make is a rivet. A rivet is a piece of metal that's shaped sort of like a capital letter I. So it's got a straight piece in the middle and two flattened out pieces on the top. So we've already learned how to create that flattened out piece by upsetting our metal. Now we're going to learn how to use that to create a joint. So I have 3 pieces of flattened metal that have drill holes through them, and I can use the riveting method to join these together. I could make a very tight rivet and make these all very close together, but one of the nice things about rivets is you can actually use it to create something that's kinetic or has motion to it. So the first thing I'm going to do is take this little piece of metal that I've already created an upset end on, and I'm going to place it in my vise so that it's just the upset end that's being held in there, and it's basically sticking out other than that. Okay, as always, hammer that vise in place. Now I'm going to take the pieces of metal that I want to join, and I'm going to slide them onto this piece that I put in here. Easier said than done, apparently. The drill holes that we made are just big enough to fit on this rod. I want this one in the middle. And then let's see if we can get this one on the end. All right, got them all on there. Gonna tighten my vise down just a little bit. Now I'm gonna cut this metal so that it is just above where these three pieces come together. Kind of careful about this. I often will brace this off my hip, cut it that way. All right, now we need to grab our torch. And same process that we did before, where we're going to upset the end. So I'm putting it right in that middle cone at the tip of the inner cone, switching it around. In this case, I'm just going to hold the torch in my left hand so I don't have to take the time to turn the torch off. If you feel comfortable doing that, you certainly can. Just be aware of where that torch is pointing. Hammer straight down to mushroom out that metal, upsetting it, turn my torch off. This particular torch wants to leave that little birthday candle on there. Then I'm going to undo my base. Maybe. And now I have these three pieces that are on this little eye-shaped bar, but they still move, right? So they have a kinetic element to it. This might be something that's really interesting to include in your sculpture. I could weld another piece of metal. Say I wanted to join it with this organic form I made earlier. I could weld that onto the rivet and start to create some really interesting things from these components. So that's upsetting metal and using that upset metal to create a rivet. And again, upsetting the metal just means compressing it. And a rivet is just a letter I shaped joining mechanical piece of hardware.